today is a special episode on a very powerful, timely, and urgent dialogue of practices for us to be engaged in as leaders, which is trauma in leadership. How does trauma, historical trauma, recent family trauma, recent incident trauma, racial trauma, affect who we're being as we lead? And not just who we're being, but the outcome, the limits, the patterns, the perpetual nature. Imagine if a collective of us, a critical mass of us leaders in all industries, touching thousands upon hundreds of thousands upon millions of lives, took on healing. What would be possible in that outcome? So Resmaa is a healer, author, master coach, and trauma specialist. He helps people, communities, and organizations heal from and build resilience around historical and racialized trauma through body-centered psychology. He is a best-selling author, a New York Times best-selling author of several books, including My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma, and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Our Bodies, a deep exploration of how trauma affects us all. It combines theory and analysis with practical strategies for healing ourselves. Now, what you're going to hear and find is that the ability to metabolize trauma that is located historically in our bodies is not a big aha moment. It is actually small practices over time. Almost like siphoning out something, I would imagine, right? So grab a journal or a notebook, lean back, open your mind and your body for this conversation. Clearly, one of the most significant areas where human resources and owners and founders and entrepreneurs and managers and executives are focusing on with their teams and with themselves is around the trauma and the impact of the pandemic on all people. That's truly something that everybody was engaged in a conversation, even during 2020, that time, thinking about, man, we're going to come out of this thing with some serious PTSD. However, I think to stack on top of that is, for me and my background of having trained thousands and thousands and thousands in my coaching, executive training, leadership training days, having gone through that for so many years internationally, one of the key things that I found in developing managers was the more people that you were accountable for, the more conversations you had to have, the more activated and triggered your past was. So you'd go through layers of like sibling issues, peer issues, authority issues with parent background. And I could tell when I'd sit in front of somebody about what age they were in that moment where they were triggered. And so a lot of development with leadership came into their humanity, their background, their past. With your work, one of the things that I am so inspired by and moved by and excited by is really having organizations and leaders and individuals take on doing trauma work, because it's not just about this last year, and it's not just about their current life and the trauma that they've experienced, potentially having an alcoholic father or mother, or being in abusive family environments, or not being able to share their feelings and interact in a healthy way. I think most of us can relate to any number of that on the scale of what kind of trauma we've experienced. But the past that we come from, the lineage that we come from history, has just been passing down
unresolved trauma. And I think about this, Resmaa, because I think about your, meaning the world of business. You are constantly trying to figure out how to be smarter, how to be better, how to lead, how to develop teams, how to coach people internally, how to, have people, for you to be successful, for you to do your best, for you to hit your goals and hit your marks and the ROI. You think of all of that and the stress that is. And none of these people, for the most part, have had any trauma work. Seems amazing that you'd put people in a high pressure cooker and never resolve their past in this way. So I wanted to kick off and start talking about the impact within organizations for the individual as a manager or leader of not looking back and doing the work.
That's a lot.
Go.
So as you were talking, there was this piece that kind of roiled in me. There were a couple pieces you were talking, and one piece flipped and then another piece flipped. One piece flipped in my chest and the other piece flipped in my stomach. And the piece that flipped in my stomach is this idea of, you said triggered. I don't use that word because I don't believe triggered is operational. I don't think you can work with triggered. I think you can work with activated, right? And so what ends up happening is that when we're talking about trauma, people have these notions in their brain about what that means. And so one of the first things that happens when people get activated, one of the first skill sets that they've developed is this override, right? So when you're talking about trauma to people who are in high pressure situations, they don't hear it the way that you think they're hearing it. They hear it as, okay, yeah, boom. And then they immediately genuflect to override, right? They don't hear it as a energy or as a thing that shows up when they're up against their edges, or a thing that shows up that actually tempers and conditions their growth process, that they have to, in working with these types of traumatic things, working with them in slow ways actually allows you to metabolize those things in a way that provides more fuel for your success, and as opposed to fuel that burns you out, right? And so when I'm talking with leaders, and I think this is such an important question, question that you just posed, is that many times in corporations, leaders they may be very effective people, but they don't take enough time to create a container by which the charge of trauma can actually be worked with, right? Trauma and traumatizations and things that we have overrode and gotten through and gotten over, quote unquote, gotten over, many times still have a charge to it. And that charge can have a charge around what I believe is a historical charge and an intergenerational charge and a persistent institutional charge, is urgency and stuckness at the same time. Many leaders know that pressure, or know that energy, but they override it in order to get things done. And I think for leaders, a lot of times they don't spend enough time actually cultivating a container that can withstand that an inquiry into that urgency and that charge. They just override it and get on to the next thing. And what ends up happening is that eventually you either end up burning out, or you end up burning your team out, or you end up in a situation to where now this strategy, this override strategy, has now affected your health, your relationships, and the way you move in the world. So your question for me really is a piece around beginning to understand the dynamics, the energetic dynamics of activation, of override, of urgency and stuckness, as opposed to what normally happens is when stuff shows up and it has become so debilitating that now we want to address these pieces as opposed to creating a container by which these pieces are addressed along the way.
Yes. In response to that, I think one of the problems, I would say, in leadership is produce, results, reward, fail, get rid of. And we are dividing people up into leaders, up into these categories that are further suppressing them resolving that trauma. So I'm going to give a real example, because I think one of the biggest things, especially for me, is people talking, experts or anyone talking about something and not making it real in real life. So I'll use myself as an example because I'm most intimately knowledgeable about me.
Right.
Okay, so here's some things that I've unraveled in my current existence in my life, not just my past, just my current existence. And so first was when I was a really little girl, something happened. I went to speak up for myself, like defend myself as a human being, little girl. And I was physically assaulted. And something got collapsed in there, which was when I speak up with my true, authentic voice in behalf of myself, to protect myself, to defend my boundaries, to speak my truth, I will get hurt, but like really hurt. I mean, imagine a little girl. So there was a way that after that, I started to operate in life, which was, I'm never going to share the thing that's most true about me, but I'll find out what the other person wants, and I'll be that person.
Yes.
So it's like a workaround that I built so that I was never being myself. I would never speak up first. I'd listen and read the room. Even, I'm talking about elementary school, a little kid,
That's right?
I'd read the room, I'd figure out the teacher. And once I figured everybody out, I'd navigate to get myself. And I kept doing that because it was working. It was working, right? And then at some point, now I'm older, I'm a teenager, and I started really, really getting invested in being in the entertainment business. And I was performing and traveling, and then I started speaking up about the thing that I really wanted. And someone said, "Oh, you're not strong enough. You don't have enough backbone to make it in that business." One person said it in my family, okay? And then I made this decision and I said, "Oh, I have to be so strong. I have to be like a level of strong so that anything I did after that was shove down whatever you're emotionally weak about and get stronger." So my voice got more intentional. It got more firm. I got more edgy. And I just started to kind of plow over people.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that I never was kind, but for the most part, I was horse blinders on. So now I've got kind of two layers of it. I got one where I can never fully speak my truth. It's not safe. And then I got the second one where I can never do enough to be strong.
Yeah.
And then on top of it, I've got the immigrant inherited kind of thought process around you come to America, you have a business, you work hard. And if you work hard, you'll get good things. So I got it locked in my mind that the harder that I work, the more I can reach my goals.
Right.
Not work smarter, not get anything, just the harder that I work, right? So now here I am now getting trained. I'm probably around late 20s, early 30s. And now I'm doing enough out of the entertainment business, went into executive training, kind of started immediately going up, producing all these results and being a leader in that world. And people are like, great, we're going to have you lead these teams. We're going to have you. And now here I am going in my trajectory of now I'm accountable for other people.
Yes.
Trauma unresolved, okay? Trauma unresolved.
As a matter of fact, it's compounded now.
Oh, it's compounded.
Yeah.
But I'm getting rewarded.
Exactly.
Because I'm getting rewarded because I work nonstop.
Yep.
I produce results.
Yep.
Okay, I pound on people.
Yep.
I plow through people.
Yep.
People are afraid of me.
Yep.
They do what I say because they're afraid of me, or they argue with me and I do whatever I can to get rid of them. Not intentionally,
Yep.
but that's the mechanism, right? That's going.
That's exactly right.
And I keep going, and I notice now I'm here 33, 34 years old now at that time. And I am going to the hospital over and over
Here we
again.
go. There it is.
With severe kidney infections.
There it is.
out of nowhere. They can't figure out what's wrong with me. My immune system is just tanking. Again, the hospital's like, emergency rooms, going to see doctors. They can't figure out. They're like, you're totally fine. Everything's fine. We don't know what's going on with you. Just get some rest and what have you. And this continues hormonally. All of these things are happening until my early 40s, where what I realized through a series of mentors and other more senior people that really, really started to take an interest to help me see a different pathway was listening to people, being present, honoring my feelings, slowing down, even my speaking, because even my speaking was like a train running down the tracks. I had to get everything out. And there was this, and I could feel it, Resmaa, there was this desperation that time was running out, and I had to do everything and produce everything I possibly could, or it would get taken away from me.
Right.
Like that first slap where I wanted to speak up for myself and then I got assaulted.
Right.
And this past 12 years, I would say, has been slowly unpeeling that onion of what happened, what I put together, the impact on me. And I've noticed that I've had to keep slowing it down to be able to hear people, to get feedback, to check in with my body. And there's something that I know all leaders experience, which is you go from job to job, because we do this in our relationships, but we definitely do it in leadership. You go from job and it starts off great and you think everything's going great and you're doing everything possible. And all of a sudden you start to notice, oh, it's not the way that I want it to be. But the feeling, the emotional body feeling is familiar. It's starting to feel, I've felt this before, and the road starts to go the direction it does. And that's when I got so invested in, if I can slow myself down enough to find out what's happening and to fully unravel where this came from, how I put this together, I can start to expand my abilities in leadership. Because at this point, I've got about 4 notes I can play. And I just keep playing them over and over again. And a song with 4 notes, eventually, I'm sure, is not going to be
becomes a little monotonous.
It's a little monotonous, right? So I say that to you because it's hard when you are a result producer and when you can make things happen to really tell a truth on yourself, to really expose yourself this way. But if we don't create environments for leaders, especially the result producers and the ones who are failing too, like it's all in one thing. If we don't create environments where you can speak this shameful part of you, which, by the way, to many people, it's not even, they're like, really, that happened? I didn't even think that was that big of a deal. Not for all of us, it's not so horrific what's happened in our life. But to us personally, it was deeply shameful. That has nothing to do with my lineage and what I know my family went through. I'm just dealing with my current existence right now.
The personal, yeah.
So I wanted to share that because it's important that, for a topic that I'm passionate about and being able to be so passionately engaged with you about your work and your purpose of contributing this to all of us, I don't think anybody can forward it if they're not willing to talk about their own stuff that has gone in their life. And so I'd love to hear anything you have to say about what I shared, the work that I'm doing.
First off, I think, thank you for sharing that. I think the people that are hearing this and hearing our conversation, I really believe that this is going to matter. That's the first piece. The second piece is that when you're going through stuff like this and you come to some realization that stuff is off, or something is not quite right for me, one of the first things that we can do is that we can go to this place of, oh, something must be wrong with me. I must be in some way defective. Right? That a testimony to my defectiveness is the fact that I'm feeling like this. Because if I wasn't defective, I wouldn't be feeling like this. I would have already gotten over this. I would have already handled this. I would have already conquered this. I would have already, right? And especially when you're an executive or you're in charge of people, you're not necessarily paid for your understanding of nuance right? As a matter of fact, what has gotten you to where you're at in some industries is a lack of understanding of nuance. And when we're talking about trauma, and what you're saying is that at some point, I started to begin to understand and give room to nuance, right? That yes, I was getting rewarded. Yes, I was accomplishing a great many things. And there was a part that was tied to my integrity that was constantly gnawing at me. And that gnawing put me in the hospital. And that gnawing weathered my brain architecture. And that gnawing weathered my endocrine system. That gnawing weathered my musculoskeletal system. And at some point, before it got to a place to where it was chronic, you started to inquire and lean into what else was going on. What else was happening for me? What else? Not what else do I need to resolve? Because I don't speak about resolve. Because some of the things that happen for us are not resolvable, right? What has to happen is that we have to metabolize that energy in a way that is used for fuel for our freedom or fuel for our purpose, as opposed to fuel that is now burning us up, fuel that is weathering us. And so it is a metabolizing is when I listen to your story, I hear metabolization. I hear trying new things. I hear playing with pieces, right? This is one of the things when I'm working with executives or working with people in general, is that I try and get them to understand the difference between operating and trying to get more tools in your toolbox and understanding and working with the toys in your toy box. That is a different framing, right? Toys in your toy box suggest inquiry. It suggests curiosity. It suggests playing, which in many corporate environments are not given any room. And so when I'm working in the same way, when I'm working with executives, part of what I'm really working with them on is how do you begin to cultivate this idea around toys and a toy box as opposed to tools and a toolbox. Tools suggest something to be fixed. Tools suggest one tool for a problem. Toys suggest the ability to lean into and be curious around, is the problem exactly the way that it is? Or are there other ways that this particular problem can be leaned into, can be thought about, can be embodied? And so for me, when I'm listening to you talk, it is a perfect illustration of exactly how you need to go through the process from a place of integrity, right? That the gnawing that happens for us is not a testimony to defectiveness. It really is our integrity saying, I'm not going to let you just shorthand yourself. There are other things that need to be tended to. You need to tend to these other things. And so that's the way I kind of think about it. When it comes to leadership, there are all of these pieces that in our organization that get room, that are said to be important. And then there's those quiet, activated pieces that show up as sickness, that show up as relationship stuff, that show up as gnawing, that if we can begin to slow it down, you said it beautifully, if we can begin to slow it down, not just individually, but communally, if we can begin to slow it down and inquire into those things, there may be much more room for our success than we are currently giving room for.
This is great. Okay, so let me now apply that, and you tell me if I got this. Let me apply that to what I just shared. So, because again, I think for leaders and people that listen, it goes into this very logical place, like, oh, great, wow, that completely makes sense, but there's still no access to truly apply it in the moment. Because when you're in the moment, it's like a deer in headlights. When I have what you call activation, right? When I'm activated, if I don't slow myself down, I will make a whole set of decisions inside of a reaction.
Yeah.
This person, my team, people on my team, one of the people in the senior, the fact that it's coming up Friday, there's results or numbers that need to be hit, the pressure's being pounded on me, I experience as being pounded on, right? And then I go into this reaction, this strong reaction to produce this result from this place that I have survived in my body, and how I have produced results by forcing my own self to do things, whether I feel unwell, whether I angry or whatever, but I drum up this world in me to go produce these results. And even if I produce the results, my experience is empty. I've talked to Pete Carroll about this before, that I have this experience that if I am activated in this reactionary space and I force out a result from this place of survival that I put together to survive things in my past, I will yes or no produce that result. But the other side of it is I am empty. I experience being empty. I experience no sense of accomplishment. I experience a sense of almost apathy.
Yeah.
I experience aloneness. Like on the other side of it, I am alone. The distinction for me is, and let me say one more thing about that, which is it is so hard because I've been doing it for years and practicing for years. It is so difficult and takes such a level of understanding, almost like my brain, for me in my hyper survival moment to produce this result, to make this thing happen, in my reaction. I'm fully in my reaction. And then it's like talking myself off a ledge a bit. I'm having this very intense dialogue with myself where I'm like, Audrey, don't go there. Just slow yourself down because there's some other things that you cannot see right now. And I'm like, no, I need to do this. I need to keep going. And I have to keep doing that until I just keep reminding myself, you're going to go to this place where you've always gone to, and you're not going to have this sense of, and here's the key thing for me, nothing new is going to happen.
Right.
There's no access to innovation and creativity where you're at, Audrey. And so I'm slowing myself down. So I have experienced the following, that I'm only always ever reacting or creating. And my only access to get from reacting to creating is getting myself to be present. And if I can get myself, which is slowing down, it's breathing, it's getting up and walking out of the room, excusing myself to just take a walk around. It's a number of things that I do. And if I can get myself present and just lay everything out that's happening to me, then I start to tap into this space of innovation, of creativity. And it literally wasn't until last year, I say, that I was looking through some research, and I found that when the brain goes into survival, it actually shuts off parts of the brain that access creativity and innovation. So that completely made sense to me. But am I getting what you are saying, and what am I missing?
Yes, you're getting it. And for those people that are listening to me and you talk right now, sometimes the way that people listen to us is that they hear it as a series of tools and steps. And I want to push back on that. This is not a series of tools and steps. Me and you've talked for a while. And so you know that the way that I think about things is about, reps, right? I think about reps, like that aloneness, that emptiness, that lack of accomplishment, that quaking that shows up, right? That says, I'm running, I'm doing, I'm hitting numbers, and I'm still empty, right? That sometimes what has to happen is that not only do we have to slow down, but we literally have to pause, right? And because the pausing forces the body and forces you to begin to quake and develop discernment around things. And discernment is this constrictive thing. It happens in the body. When you're trying to discern one thing from another thing, there is a constriction that happens. And many of us want to get rid of that constriction. that constriction is literally the edges of our growth. And so for me, let me tell you a story. So there's this famous story about Michael Jordan, right? About how when Michael Jordan first came into the league, he was a great, talented player. And for the first 5, 6, 7 years in Chicago, right? He was Michael Jordan. He was an amazing basketball player. Every year, though, in those first 6 years that he would get ready to go into the playoffs, he would run up against the bad boys, the Detroit Pistons, right? And the Detroit Pistons would give him the blues, right? Detroit Pistons, they couldn't jump. They couldn't necessarily, they weren't necessarily as skilled as him, but they knew how to put an elbow in his back. They knew how to, when he would jump, undercut him, right? They knew how to do stuff to ground the great flight of Michael Jordan, right? And so for years, he couldn't get past them in the playoffs, right? And that's what I call a life rep. A life rep comes at you fast. It comes at you hard. If you haven't done any, what I call invited reps, when a life rep happens, you get overwhelmed. You override. You get things close in on you. And then you keep doing the same things that you've been doing, right? So what happened was Jordan started to begin to go, first of all, I need some help. Second of all, when he got up against his edge of, I want a championship. I want to be the best basketball player that's ever made. These guys are blocking me. If he stopped there, that's it. He's still Michael Jordan, but he is not the Michael Jordan that we know.
Right.
So what he had to do is he had to go through a tempering and conditioning process. So what Michael Jordan started doing was after and before games, he was doing what I call invited reps. He would invite slower reps, more things he had control of, and he would practice the things that he would be practicing in the life rep at the arena in the middle of a game. He would practice those, but then he would take it to another level. So what happened was he started conditioning himself to be able to withstand the current conditioning. He had to condition himself and temper himself to be able to withstand it. So he had to lift weights. He had to learn skills that he was already good at certain things. He had to develop skills that around things he did not like, even though it made him uncomfortable. That's the invited rep piece. And so what happened is that he began to study film and read and notice himself and his tendencies. He started in doing that first and cultivating that container first. So then when he began to look at other people and their tendencies, he started from a place of resource first as opposed to a place that I'm defective first. So I'm saying all that to say this, that for executives a lot, they don't slow down enough to pause to be able to notice how their virtues are intertwined with their limitations. So what they do is do things to get rid of the limitation and inadvertently get rid of the fuel that they would be using in order to get better. And so the pausing for me when I'm working with executives is so important, is because that's where all of the fuel is, all the uncomfortableness is, and all of the possibility is. But you have to condition the container to be able to withstand it first. If you just try and do it in the middle of a time crunch, and you haven't invited small opportunities to practice it and temper and condition yourself, you will just genuflect back to that thing that helped you survive in the first place. Does that make sense?
Completely. It makes me think of it. It's such a great example in terms, and I loved that you used this because physically this is how it felt to me. You said the walls are closing in on you. And that's how it feels when you're in that place of oh my gosh, I'm doing my same thing, or that person is making me so upset, or I need to force this outcome. And you feel it. You feel the world starts to be, your occurring starts to get very narrow. The horse blinders go on and the pressure feels very physical. You could feel it in your, like for me, I feel it in my chest. My
Yes.
chest starts to tighten.
Yes.
And I start to get almost like a burning sensation of like rage. It's almost like a rageful response that kicks me off into producing those kind of forceful results. I think that why I really appreciate your sharing the Michael Jordan and then what he had to do when he came to this place. And we know that if you just kind of put yourself in his shoes, he must have been totally livid, completely frustrated, wanted to just plow them,
Yeah.
and could have easily been like, I'm just going to keep forcing myself to do the same thing over and over again. And we all know where that goes. Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. We know that quote.
Right.
But he said, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to do this kind of work. And that's what you gave. I believe that it's not as simple as just two kinds of leaders, but if we just break up leaders into two kinds of ways, there's leaders that produce a lot of results so that, and are really outspoken. They could talk you into anything. They could walk in a room and just take over and all that. And in our minds, because of the way that we see leaders and have been conditioned to see leaders over the years, is we say, that's a real leader.
Right.
That person's talking up, they're whatever. But they don't have any of the work that they have done. And probably not only the toys, they probably don't even have all the tools either.
Exactly.
They just have that gift of loudness. Like I would say, like me, like that's one world that I think is very dangerous. If we don't know how to interact with those kind of leaders, it's very dangerous, the impact that they can cause. I'm going to talk about that in a second. The other kind I'll just lump in of leaders are the ones who have, who know how to do something so that you give them people, but they're not constituted to interact with other human beings well. They're shy, or they're antisocial, or whatever that behavior is. This happens a lot in engineer departments.
Yeah.
Where someone's really strong, but they're kind of set in this, they've sort of picked this path of self-inclusion of work, isolated kind of work. And then all of a sudden you give them 10 people, 15 people, 100 people to manage.
Yep.
And it's furthering sending them into the walls coming down on them. And then the HR or whomever reprimands them, they get their write-ups, and then they're gone. That person now is further locked in the world.
Yep.
I bring up these two because these are a common two types of leaderships that I see over again.
Yep.
Talking about the first ones of taking up space, I believe a lot of these ones are where you build a culture that's very toxic.
Yeah.
Because those are the leaders that get away with bad behavior because they can talk themselves out of it, or they produce results. Verbally abusive, inappropriate behavior, microaggressive or completely aggressive racial
Yep.
issues. This is where that kind of internal place that people have come to where you've had to fire your best producer in the company. And it's been 10 years, the impact of the people in your company
That's right.
and what they had to contend with, watching somebody get away with that is so incredible. The unraveling for your team, for your company,
Right.
to heal that culture is incredible. I want to talk about that one first.
So you said an interesting word, and I want us just to pause for a second on the word. You said constituted. Constituted. That certain people are constituted in a particular way, right? And that constitution is not just something that just falls out of the sky on some, right?
100%.
The
100%.
Constitution is created. The Constitution is literally the container building manifested, right? And so when you have that bad actor that is producing, and it goes along for 10 years, you are now not just contending with that bad actor, but also the container that they've built, right? The container that they built suggests the rules that everybody has to operate within, right? So it is not just that you have a bad actor. you also have a container that is also not responsive to where you're trying to go or what you're trying to do. And so this idea of constitution is very important in that when as a leader, if you don't understand your own constitution and how you got there, right, you will genuflect to things as right because they have allowed you, your rightness means do I survive, right? That's what rightness means to you is do I survive? And how do I survive? Do I survive with the ethos and the ethic that this is a dog-eat-dog world and I got to get you before you got to get me? If that's the ethos that you survive in, then that container that you create also has that baked into the container, right? And yes, you may produce results at the same time that you produce pain, hurt, and brutality and viciousness. Do I have the constitution where I think that the world is a dangerous place and I'm the problem? Right? That's a different type of constitution. If you are not, as a leader, excavating, playing with that, being curious around what is my constitution? Am I constituted like this? Am I constituted like that? Is there a middle place that I'm constituted? And pausing on that. Because the absence of pausing on it and the not allowing the quaking to produce or the quaking to manifest itself, not doing that causes damage. It causes damage. In order to create a container by which that inquiry is part of the way that we do business, the way that we do work, that as a leader, I want to be the type of leader and I want to create the type of container that allows people to not just in terms of verbalizing, but also in terms of the way that people vibe on it. That people vibe on the idea that this is a place to where inquiry is exalted. Where inquiry, not just my own personal inquiry, but or not just organizational inquiry, but my own personal inquiry is important, right? And that involves leaders taking a real clear look at what type of leader they are currently and what are the limitations. So let me just say this last piece. This last piece is this, and I intimated it a little bit earlier on, but I want to land it now. One of the reasons why leaders, I believe many leaders find it difficult to do some of the processes that we're talking about is that they have what I call an iatrogenic problem. Okay, iatrogenesis or iatrogenic is this medical term, and it is a medical term that says that doctors may be doing something to clients that they believe will help the clients or help the patients, but is actually making them sicker. Right? And so what is the problem is that their virtue has lined up so acutely with their limitations that no matter which way they turn their head, they can't see the limitations. Like people say something, they can't see the limitations of their thing because their virtue is lined up with their limitations. And what has to happen for doctors and anybody else is that the healing comes in when there is misalignment. The misalignment forces the leader and the doctor to deal with the quaking that happens when you're misaligned, right? And the natural tendency is that when there's a misalignment, the natural tendency is to try and get things back in alignment because that's what you know. But where the pausing comes in at is beginning to get off alignment, deal with the quaking, and when it starts to go back again, bring it back off. These are the reps. Continue to bring things offline so that quaking can cook enough so something new can emerge forth, as opposed to staying things in alignment that's weathering everybody in that alignment.
It's interesting that you say alignment, because people have like your chiropractor puts your body back in alignment and then they're righting a wrong, but you're using alignment very distinctly. I hear you use alignment like disruption.
Alignment in my thing, in the way that I think about this, alignment, that thing that we're comfortable with, that thing that our virtue, the reason why we can't make changes a lot of times is because we're coming at it from our virtuous side, and that virtuous piece is part of how I have navigated the world. I am a good producer. That is my virtue. The limitation of that is that I run roughshod over everybody.
That's right. That's right. And so here's internally, right, in developing your people, as you're listening to this, as like you said, as leaders are listening to this and they're like, okay, how do I develop these types of people in my organizations that are my top result producers, but they have bad behavior? And I think there's a few things in that opening up that alignment with them going to what they know, going to what they know. And we're, listen, businesses are meant to grow and they have to produce results and they've got to make money. You get these people, you're like, I can't get rid of them. This person produces results.
That's right.
And maybe, this team of admins who's not giving anything, let's say, to the bottom line that they're looking at it, has a complaint about this person. This person's bringing in $5 million organization. Who am I to let go? This happens all the time, right? Where people get away from this bad behavior. I think one of the first issues that people have internally in developing these kind of leaders is thinking that these bold, like they have this bold constitution and this bad behavior, this bull in a china shop, or aggressively yelling or verbally abusing people, whatever the flavor is of those people, that you think that if you press on them harder or give them, you got to change, you got to do something about them. People think aggressive people, if you match their aggression, it's going to help them change. But that's like giving a baby candy. It's like, it
ends up being a reinforcer. Yeah.
100%. It's reinforcing that. And nobody sees the fear. I say the louder the person, the more abusive the person, the greater the fear is going on inside of them.
Yeah. All perpetrators have a victim underbelly.
Yes. So that's the big part for me about the work that you do in trauma, is to understand we can't throw lashes at this type of person, because to me, the best end result would be that leader has access to their vulnerability, to their voice, to their pain, that they have an access to begin to diffuse that.
Right.
And that the culture gets to see that softness come over without taking away their goal producing, gotta go for it.
And they will resist it. Here's the piece that I don't think most organizations understand, is that when you start to begin to work this with a top producer or but they're a bull in the china shop, you are not just asking them to change. What you're literally asking them to do is be vulnerable. I mean, that's what you're asking them to do. You're asking them to try something that they don't have. You're trying to ask them to take a leap of integrity towards something that they have no efficacy with. They have no efficacy with the things that you're asking them to develop efficacy around. And you expect them to do it because they have a performance contract that they must meet now, because they done cuss people out and all this different type of stuff. And that is a setup, right? You have to help people, whether it's the person that's constituted in a way that they collapse, or they constitute in a way that they cause others to collapse. You have to, this is the pause and the time and the space that I'm talking about, is that you have to literally create a container so they begin to slowly work with those pieces and not get overwhelmed by it in a way to where they just say, you know what, I'll just quit. That company over there is going to pay me to do the same thing, and I can do that over there without doing all of this soft stuff you trying to get me to do, without trying to get me to quote unquote grow, right? This is business. Nobody grows in business. You either meet the bottom line or you don't, right? That's right. Now, if that's the employee that you have, or if that's the producer that you have, you're not going to get them to be this kind of, harbinger of goodwill now, because now they're more in touch with their feelings. What you have to understand as an organization is that what you think is something that they should do is powerfully vulnerable to them. So you have to start with that understanding, and that people will always genuflect back to that which they know, right? Even if the other thing you're trying to get them towards might be good for them in the long run. In the short run, in the short term, you have to help them go slow. Like in the short term, you can bet that Jordan said, I'm just going to keep jumping over everybody. I'm just going to keep, dunking over everybody. And then at one point he said, I better learn how to shoot a jump shot, right? I better learn how to do it mid-range. I better learn how to improve my defense. I better learn those pieces. And what does it take to do that? You can bet that was painful. You can bet that the process of that did not allow him to lean on what he did well, on his virtue. I know how to jump. I know how to do this. I could do that. But you're telling me, and what I hear myself saying is that I can't do that now. I must do these pieces. And this is painful. I don't like doing it. I want to go back to just trying to jump. And I must develop discipline in the process and develop a certain amount of somatic grit that allows me to stay with this. So I develop the understanding of nuance, discernment, and resource, right? Otherwise, I'll just keep going to what I know. It takes so much for people when you're good at something, when you're virtuous at something. It takes so much to hold that at bay while you're cultivating these other pieces.
What is so powerful about this is I think organizations, like you were saying, is highlighting, I think organizations think that the dilemma that they're in of tolerating bad behavior because you got a strong result producer. And then, like you said, going to them and saying, okay, here's your performance review. You need to work on these things and what have you that don't help. I'm just going to say they don't help.
They don't.
And for everyone involved, and I don't think people think of this way, is that once you've developed this constitution of how to survive and be a strong result producer and survive anything. I mean, they're like the leaders like that are like the cockroaches.
They're the cockroaches. They're the cockroaches of the organization, right? They go survive, right?
They're gonna survive.
Right.
And I think what people deal with that they don't tell the truth about is, and I always say to people, if you've been working on something and been throwing everything at it in the kitchen sink and you haven't gotten the result you want, you probably didn't really want it.
That's right.
Let's just tell the truth.
That's right.
I believe that the untruth or the lie in the organization, the covertness of it is, I don't want to mess with this thing that's working.
Absolutely.
I really don't. And the thing that they don't understand is, if you can get, like me, if you can get one of these cockroaches, because I clearly was in the lane of cockroaches, I will take that and admit it. And I've had humility around it and have gone through my own internal pain of opening my eyes and truly seeing the impact on others. And I continue to do it. We just had a meeting with the team last week where I knew I had to stop and slow down and bring vulnerability. And I had to pause, I had to communicate. And everyone on the team was like, oh my God, we feel like we can breathe again. And they all had stuff to say. And they said things to me that I couldn't hear because because I was so in my world of my cockroach world. But what people don't understand is this, and this is the really important part of this type of leader that I really am committed everybody understand. If you can be effective with this work, you will actually get more results
Yes.
from that leader. And not that you pause them for a second to go work on their kindness and their vote. No, they will actually, and this is where your Michael Jordan example is so great, because if anybody saw the documentary that I did, The Last Dance, we saw in his progression of this human being going for superstardom.
Yeah.
And at some point, his superstardom hit a point where they started to give him more responsibility. It was almost like saying, okay, you're a superstar, now create other superstars. And we saw the dilemma he went through.
That's exactly right.
He was frustrated. He would lock people out. He would diminish them. And then the coach would come back and be like, you have to
That's right.
rise these people up. You cannot just...
You can't keep cutting them off at the knees and expecting them to produce.
You're going to box yourself in this place of what? Needing to go to another team. And that's where people leave, because they go, somebody else, like you said, somebody else will give me more money.
That's
Not just give me money. Give me more money.
More money. That's right.
You'll lose your top players or player. But if you get this, if you could really get this, if I create a culture, and by the way, you cannot create this culture by telling other people what to do. You yourself have to do it in the organization.
Absolutely.
This is the bonkers thing for me when I walk into an area and everybody's like, well, we told them to do this. We told them. I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you doing? CEO, head of HR, what are you doing?
What is the container that visibly people can see you have gone up against your limitations and you're taking them on, that you're extricating your limitation and your virtue. You are literally purposely going into misalignment so you can do your invited reps and allow what needs to emerge. Many times organizations don't understand that there is a cost on both sides. Right? They assume that when that big producer is producing, that there is limited cost to them. But there is not. There is an opportunity cost that is being lost when you have employees that are operating in bad faith, or they are good producers, but they are operating in ways that are undermining the peoplehood in the organization. There's a lost cost and opportunity that you're not calculating when you're saying, okay, this guy made me $5 million last year. And yeah, he may talk to women a little bit inappropriately. And we can figure that out and we can have him go to a workshop, but he made me $5 million last year. What you're missing is the fact that had the environment and the container been more conducive, you actually missed out on another 2.5 million from other people that could have been producing. That's the piece that I think is short-sighted in business sometimes, is that people don't calculate like racism and white supremacy and sexism in your company actually undercuts your opportunity. It literally takes money from the bottom line. The reason why as a business, you want to make money. Got it. If you want to make more money, then you address sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, right? You address those pieces because they actually create more opportunity for you, right?
And I'm going to say, and favoritism. Favoritism is highly suppressive. This is where the cockroaches come in.
That's right.
Favoritism.
That's right. And so if you as a leader think that, well, I don't really need as an HR leader or a leader in an organization, I'll deal with that a little bit, but that guy's making me $5 million and he's a racist pig, right? But I'm willing to go along with that. If that's what you're willing to do, then you're cutting opportunity on the other side. And if that's what you're willing to do, then at least acknowledge that's what you're doing. Don't act like, well, I'm doing everything I can to get this guy who's an asshole to stop being such an asshole. Like I'm doing everything. No, you're not. You're not doing it, and you're affecting your bottom line by not addressing these pieces. in a full-throated way, because in a full-throated way, it would mean that you have to do something. You have to actually tend to what's happening for you in this moment, in this time. So.
Great. And I would definitely say that it's like, you brought up that point about workshops, like we'll put them in this workshop or that workshop. I think the thing that's missing from that is communication tools, conflict resolution. All of those things are surface, in my opinion.
That's exactly right. That's exactly
are
right.
surface. You have to do the iceberg work.
It's what I call rug work, right? Rug work. When somebody is producing, and they've been producing for 10 years, there's been so much crap that you swept up under the rug, right? Rug work is pulling that stuff from up underneath the rug and starting to begin to look at the ugliness of it, how it has metastasized now, how it has put its tentacles in other places, right? Because so rug work is actually literally lifting up the rug and looking at the ugliness of this thing and beginning to do something about it. Many companies are more than willing to send somebody through a workshop or have them learn I statements or have them learn, all of these, go to an implicit bias training or something like that, but they ain't willing to do the rug work.
Yeah. I'm going to say these last couple of things and we'll wrap on this. We'll leave the rest to part B in our part B call. But it's interesting because back in the day when I did that work and I would find out when I would have these really intimate conversations with leaders that would reveal that, they're addicted to porn or they're drinking too much or all of those things. There was so much shame.
Their kids can't stand them.
Their kids can't stand them. They're on their third marriage and, whatever it is. It was interesting because their first pathway through that was to be with me in this incredible place of shame. And all I came back with was, of course. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Of course you are. Mm-hmm. Because this is what the damage that's done internally is for us big result producers and make anything happen and survive anything. We're the kind of people where we're trapped inside of our own bodies because of the bizarre behavior of pain and reward. Mm-hmm. It's almost like, that kind of when you grow up with an alcoholic or somebody abusive that abuses you and then afterwards goes, I love you. I didn't mean it.
The gaslighting.
That's right. And it's no organization would ever say that that's what they're doing, but it feeds that behavior.
It does.
Of I inflict pain on myself and on others, but I get rewarded because I produce the results. And it's a trap because it's a bizarre trap. And I believe this is what we see if we just take it outside of our organizations and we just kind of step back and look at the United States and the state that we're in this last year. Mm-hmm. You can see how much of the cancel culture, of these very caustic arguments that are going on. Mm-hmm. I can see the deep embedded fear, the victimhood, and also they did produce those results. You could see it. You could see it happen everywhere.
So two pieces with that. I think the shame pieces are important. I think a lot of times though, what ends up happening is that we end up genuflecting the shame because we don't want to get to some of the other gnarly pieces. Like there is shame. And then there is this deep sense of, I don't really matter. I'm not really an entity.
That's
and I
so
think that's
good, Resmaa.
And I think that's different than shame, right? I don't believe there's a such thing as cancel culture. I think what's happening is that some people need to sit the down and some people need a timeout and some people are so conditioned to not having timeouts that they call it cancel culture. You can say and do whatever you want to say and do. You cannot demand my allegiance to that. Right? And so what you call cancel culture is the fact that you need a timeout. You need to get things in order because the way that they are aligned right now are not working for communal living. If you want to be a hermit, if you want to live next to a river, you know, in your bush, do that. Right? But if you want to be in a community and commune with other human beings, you cannot do and say some of the things that you're saying. And when you say it, I get to say something about it. Right? I think this idea that that calling out bad behavior is in some way hurting the person that's making the bad behavior, and that's cancel culture, I think, is a misnomer. That is not true. Some people need to sit their down. Some people need to stop, right? And unfortunately, sometimes what has to happen is that people have to force you to stop in order for you to slow down and pause and look at what you're doing and the damage that's being done in the process. I had it, same thing. About a month ago, my team all came to me and they were like, Resmaa, you are grinding us to death. We don't move like you. We're not gonna, you send us messages at 3:30 in the morning. And then you expect us to answer it at 8, right? You're killing us, right? And my virtue was that I'm a go-getter. Let's get it. Let's move. Right? That's my nature. I've had to learn that. And the limitation of that is that you burn people out that you love, that are rocking with you. You leave people behind, right? And so for me, this work for me really, especially working with executives and stuff like that, this work for me is really about not trying to make you the Dalai Lama. Nobody's trying.
Right.
Right?
Right.
But we want you to be happier. And there are indicators in your life that suggest that you're not happy. Look at that. Work with that. Hold that and see what emerges.
And I'm going to invite you to actually take some notes inside of the question, what traumatic experiences do you recall from your life? 2, what traumatic experiences or events do you recall your family sharing about from the family history? And then 3, what traumatic experiences do you know of came from the timeline of geographical location of which you are from? Now, if you're like me and it's most immediately with immigrant parents spread out in many different areas, it is interesting to look at the historical lineage and the traumatic historical events that led up to influencing my family, not their internal trauma, but their environmental trauma. When you list recollections from these 3 questions, step back and look at what you've put together and see if you can start to read what has been this lid, this perpetual pulling at you in your life. I promise you, you're going to see yourself in it and you're going to see your leadership in it. But most importantly, you'll see what there is to heal or what hasn't been healed yet. Because if you can capture this, what it will reveal to you are your patterns. I hope that this opens some very significant insights for you. Please take this time and honor yourself and give yourself the space to begin this dialogue and begin the work of what it will take to heal embodied trauma.